Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Franklin Delano Roosevelt entered office in 1933 in the midst of the Great Depression. He ran his campaign on the promise of a New Deal for the American people, a central part of which was Social Security, a government-sponsored welfare payment system. It was developed in response to the unemployment and poverty of the Great Depression, and although it initially faced strong opposition, once implemented, Social Security became an integral part of American life that continues to adapt and change. Overall, the 1920s were a time of wealth and affluence for Americans. Most assumed the prosperity would continue and saw no need for a federal safety net. The state-level assistance programs that preceded Social Security in America weren't sustainable because beneficiaries received payments without making any contribution. They covered only the truly destitute who had no family members that could support them. It was assumed that families would take care of their own. Another social difference before the Great Depression was that few people actually retired. Most kept working until they were too sick to do so, or until they died. However, they were often allowed to cut back their hours and maybe switch to a less strenuous area of work. This was no problem for employers because in turn-of-the-century America, business was booming. The popular belief that prosperity would continue was disproven on October 29, 1929, or Black Tuesday. The stock market crash was the beginning of the worst depression in American history. People all across the country were devastated. Thousands lived in slums at the edges of cities. The number jobless went from 4 million at the beginning of 1930 to 9 million halfway through that year. 14 million people were unemployed by 1933. Seeking help from friends and family was not an option because almost everybody was in the same hopeless situation. About half of senior citizens, who probably would have relied on their children, were instead dependent on outside assistance in 1935. An unemployed steelworker's wife said, "Sure, we'd like to help ourselves. We'd prefer it. But how can we? My husband hasn't had a job since early last year. Can't the president see that people like us have reached the end of the line? What's to become of us? Doesn't anyone care?" The Depression brought about a fundamental shift in American ideals. People started to realize that the aged, the unemployed, anyone else in need, and the country as a whole would do better with a helping hand. For a lot of people, the time for rugged individualism had passed. It was with that attitude that President Roosevelt entered office in March 1933. Roosevelt's New Deal consisted of many programs designed to provide jobs and reignite the economy. It was one of the deciding factors that finally ended the Great Depression. Social Security is one of its most important and lasting innovations. The original act had two goals: to solve current poverty issues and prevent their reoccurrence in the future. Consequently, there were two parts to the 1935 Act: pensions for the already retired and, in the words of President Roosevelt, compulsory and contributory annuities, which in time will establish a self-support system for those now young and for future generations. It had a 2% tax rate paid half by workers, half by employers. As FDR put it, "We put those payroll contributions there so as to give contributors a legal, moral, and political right to collect their pensions. With those taxes in there, no damn politician can ever scrap my Social Security program." Despite its careful design and good intentions, Social Security had its critics.
There were fears that by letting the government get that involved, whether it was Social Security or the National Labor Relations Act or the controlling of prices, the government was overstepping the boundaries that in America, going back to Thomas Jefferson, we were sort of used to having. What ultimately allowed him to move the New Deal forward were there were more people in the United States who were suffering under the effects of the Depression and who were willing to essentially let the government do very new things that provided the political support the Roosevelt administration needed to adopt these very progressive and new policies.
In addition, by the nature of the jobs not covered, the program assisted mainly white males. Many industries dominated by women and minorities, such as agriculture and domestic service, were not covered in the original act, causing discontent among these demographics. The NAACP called Social Security a sieve with holes just big enough for the majority of Negroes to fall through. However, the Supreme Court would prove the most difficult obstacle for Social Security to overcome. Two major cases challenged Social Security: Halving v. Davis and the Strood Machine Company case. In Halving v. Davis, George P. Davis, a stockholder in Edison Electric, sued Edison because he felt that the employer tax robbed him of part of his equity. Davis challenged the constitutionality of Social Security's payroll taxes as they are not listed in the Constitution's tally of taxes. The court ruled that Mr. Davis's interpretation of the taxing powers given to Congress was too rigid. In the Strood Machine Company case, many of the same points were raised, but it was the constitutionality of the unemployment provisions of the Act that were questioned. The Strood Machine Company had paid its first unemployment tax installment and then sued the government to get it back. The Constitution states, "The Congress shall have the power to provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States." Strood Machine Company argued that the unemployment program did not qualify as providing for the general welfare. In a huge victory for Social Security, the court once again ruled in its favor. Just 4 years after it was passed, the 1939 amendments significantly changed and improved the system. Benefits were extended to provide some coverage to spouses and widows of workers, as well as reducing benefits to unmarried workers. They changed the benefits formula to take into account the period of time over which contributions are made and the average wage over that time. The final important adjustment was to replace lump sum payments with monthly ones. Many more amendments followed, expanding and improving coverage. Major ones include the addition of benefits for permanently disabled workers in 1956 and the introduction of Medicare, a system of health care for beneficiaries, in 1965. The program has grown immensely. Total benefits paid were 0.33% of the gross domestic product in 1950, 2.8% in 1970, and 4% in 1990. Although most of the changes to Social Security were consistent with the vision of its architects, the country has changed in unpredicted ways. Some changes are the direct result of Social Security, such as that in the perception of retirement.
That instead of people living to roughly 65 and not being in especially good health, not being easily able to produce income on their own, there are now significant fractions of people who are hitting 65, 70, 75, capable of earning high income or at least a moderate income or some income, but because of the incentives in Social Security, choosing retirement. And so people's attitudes toward what a retirement is and what fraction of people can expect to have a healthy retirement, a relatively luxurious retirement, seems to have changed radically.
Over 90% of eligible seniors received benefits in 1992, accounting for more than half the income of 63% of beneficiaries. The program was not meant to provide so much support for so many people for so long a period of time as it does today. Another reason for concern over the long-term viability of Social Security is the changing ratio of contributors to beneficiaries. Funding the benefits for the baby boomers, the incredibly large generation reaching retirement now, is the foremost challenge facing Social Security. The future of Social Security is a topic up for discussion at debates and dinner tables all across the country. Privatizing the system was considered, but if there was another depression and Social Security was privatized, the system would fail at the very moment it was most needed. Social Security has been called the third rail of American politics. Touch it, you're dead. However, this is not the first time it's faced a funding predicament. In 1981, there were predictions that the Trust Fund for Old Age Insurance would run out as soon as August of 1983. The Greenspan Commission was a bipartisan committee appointed to analyze the situation and come up with a solution. The 1983 amendments, based off their report, successfully averted the threat of insolvency. In 1935, it was uncertain whether the Social Security Act would even be passed. At the time, it was in conflict with basic American ideals and values. Today, Social Security is the largest government program in the world and accounts for 23% of the federal budget. It has become a vital part of our society. Debates are not over its existence, but rather how best to preserve this essential feature of the American government and way of life.
It seems to me that if the Senate and the House of Representatives in this long and arduous session had done nothing more than pass this security bill, the session would be regarded as historic for all time.
This bill demonstrates for all time our nation's ironclad commitment to Social Security.
Save Social Security first.
I want to protect Social Security.